We're not going to record Mr. Bonner Jones. He'll be the 6th in our series of important foresters for the state of Georgia in our video archive for the Georgia Division. And what I've done, Bonner, is I've asked people to just give a little background on themselves, your place of birth, your date of birth, your family background. So why don't we start off with that?
Well, I was born in Milledgeville in 1924, June the 3rd, 1924. And I've lived in Milledgeville all my life. One of the few foresters you know that's had 5 job opportunities and never left home. I attended Georgia Military College, grammar school, high school, and junior college. And after service in World War II, I attended the University of Georgia School of Forestry, where I finished in 1948.
Where did you serve in World War II?
I served in Europe in World War II, the 83rd Infantry Division. I went in Europe about 12 days after D-Day and was on the front lines for roughly 188 days before I was wounded. And then I spent about 7 months in the hospital recuperating.
So France, across France to Germany?
Well, landed in Normandy and went all the way across France and up into Luxembourg. Luxembourg, we went over to the Hurtgen Forest, and we were going out of it on an attack on the Cologne Plains when I was wounded.
So did you, once you were done recuperating, did you go back in the line, or was the war over?
No, actually they sent me home from Europe, and I came back to the States, and really was nothing but cadre from then on out.
Okay. When I interviewed Bill Bart, he said that he served in Europe and he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And I asked him if he wished to say anything about World War II. He says, "No, I don't wish to." So he must have had experiences that were just too much to talk about. I know a lot of soldiers.
I don't talk about it much. I sure don't. I was fortunate. I was wounded on the 14th day of December in 1944. And the Battle of the Bulge started on the 15th. And the 83rd Infantry Division was one of the main groups that went in to help liberate our forces up there. And fortunately for me, that if I'd have been there, I probably wouldn't be here.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got out of the service in '46?
I got out in '45, and must have been sometime November. I got out and came home and got everything together and started the university in January of '46. And I had 2 years of college prior to the war, and I lost a year of that work, and so I still had 3 years to go. And I finished in '48.
Okay. You said that you had opportunities, 4 opportunities, and you stayed in the same place. What's your job history?
My first job was with the Georgia Department of Forestry.
Huh.
And I think when I went on the payroll, there were 11 foresters on the whole staff of the Forestry Department. And I ended up in Macon as Assistant District Forester over in Macon with firefighting duties and also farm forestry duties. The only thing we had to fight fire with in those days was a Chevrolet pickup with a water tank on the back of it and Panama pumps. And about the time that I left the Forestry Department, they had started getting Jeeps equipped with plows on the back of them, which really worked quite well. And we didn't, in the 6th District, I don't think we had a single bulldozer. We didn't have anything but Jeeps. And we fought a lot of fires because people, those days there was a lot of broom sedge fields everywhere that you see trees growing in now, but they were broom sedge fields back in '48. And we fought a many fire with those pickup trucks and also the Jeeps.
Okay, where did you go from the Department of Forestry?
When I left the Department of Forestry, I left because I didn't like the political aspect of working. We had tried to buy some tools, and after we had secured the best price that the purchasing department wanted us to secure, we got a call from the governor's office telling us where to go buy them, and I was gone within 2 weeks. I couldn't stand that. I went to work with McRaff Lumber Company. They had a manufacturing facility over in Macon, and they had one in Milledgeville, and they had one in Jackson. And the lumber was produced by portable sawmills in the woods and brought to these collection points for resaw and planing. It was a good company. They were one of the leaders in hiring foresters in the state of Georgia for have a professional person on that staff to manage their timberlands. They had roughly 75,000 acres of timberland. You probably know the land from it was sold to Continental Can, and that's basically what that land was up in here. Was the old McRaff land, good timberland.
Very good.
After I stayed with them not too long, I enjoyed working with them, but I had an offer from a pulpwood dealership here in Milledgeville, Dixie Wood. I really didn't want to go to work for pulpwood people because they didn't have the best reputation in 1950 and 51. But I did, and when they asked me what I'd work for, I doubled my salary and they paid it. I almost passed out. But at any rate, I told them I had an experience with pulpwood. They said, we'll give you plenty of training. They did. They gave me 1 day of training. And away we went. One thing that history really needs to recognize that pulpwood dealers like we had in coming along in the early 50s, we were practicing more forestry in the woods, on the ground, than anybody in the state of Georgia. We were marking landowner after landowner's tracts of timber with the idea of them growing saw timber, and we were thinning from beneath and taking the pulpwood out. And that was really where this tremendous crop of saw timber that was attracted Georgia Pacific and all the other companies in here in the early 70s. That was where it was grown from, and I take my hat off to the pulpwood industry.
So you think companies like Georgia Timberlands were doing that too?
Georgia Timberlands, everybody was doing exactly the same thing. And I don't say who started it or who didn't. I know that when I got into it, that I recognized that if I was going to buy pulpwood, I had to have some way to attract the landowner's attention and do something for him where he would do something for me. We were union camp dealers, and during the 50s and early 60s, we were producing almost 30% of what union camp was consuming, and at that time they were running 32,000 cords of wood a week.
Bonner, just for history, would you explain what the dealership was in Georgia? Because I think a lot of the new foresters don't really realize what dealers were, well, and what they did back then.
Back in the old days, when I was first introduced to dealerships, to illustrate with Union Camp's arrangement, we had a territory that went to Wilkinson County, went to Washington County, and on around and down the fall line, and to Washington, Georgia, and back up to Atlanta, and back down the Central Georgia Railroad. That was our territory, and no other Union Camp dealer could come into that area and purchase wood. Well, they could come in and purchase it, but they couldn't ship it to Union Camp out of that territory. And it worked quite well. A dealer in those days really carried a lot of the inventory that the mills needed. They carried it in their pocketbook rather than in the mill's pocketbook.
And did they really have a procurement department? A major Union Camp at that point?
The mills did not have anything.
No.
They
you were
just,
their procurement.
Their procurement people, all they did was call on the dealer, and they did have conservation departments where they would furnish you technicians for timber marking, and we had 2 or 3 at times working in our territory marking what we needed to have marked. We produced 75,000–80,000 cars of selectively marked timber every year.
Is that where you met Bill Barton?
I became acquainted with Bill Barton later on, and the first Bill was probably starting his career with Union Camp at the same time I was starting mine with the dealer. The earlier group we had there, Ernie Allen and 2 others before Ernie had, who were head of wood procurement. I don't remember their names at the time. Choctaw was one of them, and I don't remember the other one. But anyway, Bill Barton came along later, and I really got to know Bill Barton in 1969 when we started a new company called J&H Timber for the purpose of supplying veneer material to Georgia Pacific in Union Camp's account. Union Camp would furnish them green wood, and they in turn would furnish Union Camp chips, and we had a contractual arrangement on a yearly basis with a fixed price up until 1990. And in 1990 they canceled that contract and we went out of the business.
So I kind of made you jump out of sequence. You worked for Dixie Wood from 1950 up until J&H Timber in 1969?
I worked for Dix Wood from, I started with them in latter part of 51. Let's say January of 52 I started with Dixie Wood. And I worked with Dixie Wood 12 years. And we had, our quota had gone from when we were producing in April of 61, we averaged 8,000 cars of wood a week of short wood. And in August of 1963, which was about 18 months later, our quota was 460 cords of wood. And Bob Griffith and John Hathaway and I couldn't all 3 live on 460 cords of wood. And I left Dix Wood and opened my own business called Oconee Wood.
Oh.
And I in turn started shipping wood to St. Regis, and they diverted most of my wood most of the time to Continental Can in Savannah. And I ran wood yards in Jackson and Milner, Georgia, and Bradley, and one in Milledgeville.
How big was your company?
My company, it was not big. We produced about 2,000 cords of wood a week, and I had one man working for me, and I was the other one.
And you had wood yards in Jackson?
Jackson.
Milner, and Milledgeville, and Bradley?
Bradley and Milledgeville, yeah. For a short time up at Williamson, but that one didn't work out very well.
So you had people at that, was that like a concentration
I had
unit?
people working in the yards,
okay.
yeah, but the field work was all done by two of us. Kenneth Welch and myself did all the field work.
I didn't know all that. And then in '69 was when J&H Timber started up?
In '69, I was in competition with Dixon Wood and Union Camp, and I handled a lot of saw timber, and they came to me with the proposition that John and I go in together and furnish the saw timber material to Georgia Pacific up in Monticello. And so we set about forming another company and merged our Milledgeville operations into one wood yard, and that was in 1970.
I see.
And then we stayed together until John died in early 90s.
And who was John?
John Hathaway.
That's the H in J&H?
The J is Jones and the H is Hathaway.
Okay.
A lot of people thought it was John Hathaway.
Okay. I have to ask you this. Where does Bonner come from? Charlie Jones is your name. Where does Bonner come from?
Well, if I'm 20 miles away from home, I'm Charlie, but if I'm in Milledgeville, I'm Bonner. And I grew up all my life being Bonner Jones. When I went in service, then I was Charlie B. Jones. And so people outside, like in Macon where you first met me, you knew me as Charlie. And I use Charlie because it's so dang much easier to say than Bonner. You have to repeat Bonner 2 or 3 times and sometimes spell it for people to understand it. It's a last name and they don't expect it to be used as a first name.
Okay, so what's your middle name?
I was named after an old gentleman here in Milledgeville who was a very close friend of my father. And that's how I got to be Charlie Bonner.
Okay. I have to ask you this, being a northerner but living in the South and appreciating Southern history, when Harley Langdale started speaking about himself, he gave his pedigree and he said which one of his relatives fought in the war. Is your family here long enough to go back to the Civil War?
I have been tracing my family, trying to, and they're hard to find, but I find I've got them pinpointed in Gretchenville up in Greene County in 1804, in the 1850 census, but I find nowhere where any of my family fought in the Civil War.
Oh.
I don't know why. And they could have, and I don't know it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one of those things.
Interesting. Okay. Do you, I don't remember exactly the time in the 80s that pulpwood would stop being measured in cords and went to tons. Can you speak to that, reasons at all?
I can get somewhere around that date. We always, until we closed our yard, still was stick scaling. And weight came first from this one, first and from that one, then from another. Everybody developed their own weight tables, and everybody said quarter wood weighed differently, and none of them were right. Your company, Georgia Craft, as an example, really did a good study on weight, but the problem was 90% of the wood that they were measuring came off of company land, and it had as much salt timber in it as it did pulpwood. Well, when you take the salt timber out of it and it go into small sticks, then the weight factor just goes to pot, you know. I was the lead consultant in the case of the Rhodes versus Georgia Craft, and repeatedly over this weight stick scale situation. They were supposed to stick scale all of Mr. Rhodes' stuff, and they started weighing it without asking him, which was a violation of the contract.
What was his name?
The C.L. Rhodes family up in Greene County.
Oh.
And where Kit Carson was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
where
that
he
man.
was handling all that stuff. And we won, by the way, with a sizable settlement. And so you're looking at about 1970, right along in there when weights took over in places stick scale.
Okay. I know that it was later than that we started thinking in terms of tons, and cruising by tons and thinking that it was.
Yeah.
It was much later than 1970. So.
Changing everybody's way of thinking to tons has been very difficult. It's been very difficult for me. On all of my consulting work, I do two workup of every cruise. I'll figure it up by tons, and I figure it up by board feet. So every cruise we do, we've got a board foot per ton ratio, and that thing will vary from 5.5 to 7.5. And this is saying that 1,000 board feet weighs 7.6 ton, 15,300 pounds for the birds. If you're doing what is considered salt timber today, it's going to be down in the 12,600 to 13,000 pounds per 1,000 board feet.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about the future of fiber. There's wood for energy. There's that plant in Silverton that's being built to convert basic waste wood and sawdust and all that for the grid. And then there's pellet mills. And what's the future of pulpwood, fiber use, and pellet mills and energy? What do you think?
Well, the difficult thing about making a prediction now is everybody predicted, including Vardaman. Vardaman made all these super predictions about what was going to happen to forestry and bought up all this stuff, and he went bankrupt because he made the wrong choice. One of the things, and I told Congressman Norwood down in Augusta in the meeting, they were all upset about Canadian lumber. And I said that Canadian lumber is not really where our problem is. I said our problem is the government has allowed the major players in this game to buy up everybody else, and we don't have any competition anymore. The day that International Paper closed the contract on Champion, that gave him every wood-consuming thing in the Savannah River region. And the price of wood went from $30 a cord to $15 a cord overnight. And it hadn't recovered but just a tiny bit since then. Mm-hmm. And it's because when nobody else sells to you, you just pay them what you want to, or they don't set it, you know. As to the future of the fiber industry, I'm excited about what's happening. I am talking to some of the people like Claude Yearwood, who's going to have the responsibility for logging places like that in Soapton. We talk about the fact that there is no economical way at the present time to harvest refuge and to process it. And something's got to be developed, and I understand it is being developed to do that. For them to continue to talk about we'll come in and we're going to use refuge, they can forget it. They're going to have to be a competitor with the pulpwood industry, and they're going to have to be using standing wood, probably 80% of what they're going to be using is going to be standing wood coming out of the woods. This refuge just isn't there. You could take a couple of loads of top scattered out there, it looked like you got a lot of stuff, but when you put it together, you have it. And are they going to be able to use dirty chips? And it's going to be clean chips. And a lot of things we don't know yet about what else going to happen with it, an expression.
Yeah,
Huh?
I agree. It's a big question. Some people question whether there's going to be enough fiber
Well,
to go around for the energy, for the...
if we don't somehow or another get a handle on the people growth in the state of Georgia, you know, you get here to the fall line, let's say you take I-20 and everything there, the other side of I-20, the top part of Georgia is almost out of the ballpark now. And we're losing our ability to grow timber by going into subdivisions and going into things where people don't want to cut the timber. You know, we don't have any major utilizer of timber that owns any land anymore in the state of Georgia.
That's true. Weyerhaeuser is the last industry that... Weyerhaeuser doesn't own land in Georgia. They already sold that, but they're the last of the old vertically integrated industries that still own land.
Yeah.
My company's in the process of selling it off.
Yeah. And that, you know, if you're concerned about what's going to happen to your mill, you're totally at the mercy of somebody else. And it takes a long time for all this stuff to evolve. It isn't like selling a car, you know, you either did or you didn't. And one of the things in my working career and in my forestry activities that I urge other foresters to do, and that's be involved, and particularly be involved with the Society of American Foresters, be involved with the school that you came out of. It pays, mentally it pays you a great deal to your satisfaction of who you are. Leon Hargraves got me interested in doing it, and things that you see that I may have accomplished in my lifetime was purely because I got involved. And on top of that, I personally, the man that wanted continuing education with the Forestry Registration Board. I'm the one that introduced the motion. I'm the one that went before the legislature, and we finally got it passed. And that was because so many foresters went back home, started to work, and they never saw another forester for the rest of the dang life. They just hibernated in a coon.
Well, I had on my list over here to have you talk about the Georgia Board of Registration for Foresters, and I've been one since '83 myself. Proud of that. I know that Archie Patterson was really important in getting that started back in 1953 and 54. Can you go back to the beginnings of how that's the board started?
I was sort of on the periphery, but you're exactly right. Archie Patterson and 2 or 3 others were responsible for writing the original law. And as it turned out, it had some flaws that we had to correct down through the years. And another forester, John Sheffield, who was also a legislator at the time, was the one that finally got it through the legislature and got it passed. It didn't pass the first time it went up there. It took 2 trips. And we had rocked along through the years with the old law and not paying much attention to it until the Sunset Law came out. And for one of the first licensing group they were going to sunset was forestry. And so we listened to what they had to say, and of course was successful in twice and defended it before the legislature. We did not get put out of business. But what it did was open our eyes to the fact that we were not offering a fair test to anybody. What the test should do at that particular time, what the test should do was test the ability of the applicant, whether he would be measured against what a normal forester is expected to know. Not an academic type question or anything like that. The old test had probably 50 questions on technical questions on computers. Mm-hmm. And I was responsible for it, and we got together some 80 foresters that met at the research center over in Macon, and we took the old test. And the highest mark made on it was a 35. So we took that test and divided committees up and utilized part of it, threw parts of it away, and made the decision that we were going to test people on their knowledge that they needed to practice forestry in the southeastern United States and not in California. And we did away with all the dendrology questions that covered all Timbuktu and what have you. And I was responsible for one area of the test, Hargraves was responsible for one area, and we put together a really good test. And since then, it's been administered by the testing division of the state, and they would at times bring in 15 or 20 foresters and go over a bunch of questions that they had questions about because people were missing them or what have you. But unfortunately, our governor has seen fit to disband the testing division, and the board is at the present time trying to make the proper decision as to who is going to handle our testing, and probably in the future it will be the Society of American Foresters that got a program where they'll come down and do it and incorporate yours with it along with theirs, and it will also enable you to be taken. I think that test along with our test, and if you pass it, then you're passing it for a certified forester as well as for the Georgia group.
Now that's new. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah. Well, everybody ain't privileged to it, at the present time. But that's
in the works, Bonner?
That's in the works. Yeah. Yeah. That's in the works. And other things that I spent 27 years on that board. Funny thing about it, I've been a Republican all my life, and I was reappointed by all of these Democrat governors, and as soon as we got a Republican governor, he wouldn't reappoint me. So it was sort of laughable, but at any rate, during the years, some of the things that I pushed for was everybody had to take the exam, change the amount of experience that a technician from ABAC needed to be able to take the test, and we really brought our test up, and during the years a group of us started what we call the southeastern region of forestry boards, and where the North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Arkansas, we would all meet together once a year and go over problems and share our experiences with each other, and it was very helpful. Everybody looked at ours as sort of the guide to, now now this is what we need to have. I was looking like, with the exception of Alabama, and Alabama has always been, because of that verbal test they have, everybody sort of held them at arm's reach a little bit, you know. I think that a forester needs to be involved. You know, I walked a group, you recall it.
Sure do.
It's something that I've enjoyed all through the years working with, and since sometime in the 60s we've hosted a barbecue chicken dinner here.
I mean, your chicken is famous.
June.
Your chicken is famous.
Yeah, and it's coming up in a couple of weeks. And Tommy Thompson, TNS Hardwood, worked with me on it for a time, and my #1 cook's Bill Millines, that you recall.
Sure.
And now Gay Wood, Glenn Warnock, is my helps with the cost of the meal and everything. We do it together, and I enjoy it quite a lot.
Were you one of the original founders of the Okmulgee chapter? I know Ernst Brender was. Were you also part of that?
I was part of the beginning, yeah.
You have any thoughts about Ernst? Any stories about Ernst?
Well, Ernest Brender was a real good friend of mine. And back when I was working for McRalph Lumber Company, Shorty Everett and I used to go up and spend a day or two every year with Brenda out at the Hitch Tee. And Brenda loved golf, as you recall, and we had the golf tournament here in Milledgeville, and I can remember his foursome of Billy McComb and Ed Knapp, and Ernie Brenda, and one other one I don't, the red-haired guy, Red Strange, that used to play in our little golf tournament every year. And my contemporaries and I, we've talked just yakking, you know, about living in the golden age of forestry. And I think that's true. I never thought that in beginning my career that I'd see forestry begin to grow as a profession. And here I am at the end of my career, and worrying about whether forestry can continue to be a profession. Recognizing quite well that we have got to become more efficient in hydrology, we've got to become more efficient in environmental issues, and we've still got to maintain our ability in silviculture, dendrology, and all the things it takes to be a field forester. I think the school is responding quite well to the challenge. They're changing their curriculum to address these matters, and I'm very pleased with that. One of my things that I am proud of in my relationship with the school, Hargraves and I, when our faculty and our staff, they had to cut timber to be able to pay them, but we were able to go to the legislature and get line item nearly $1.5 million or $1.5 million on a line item to pay our faculty and to pay our staff, and as of today that line item still exists in the budget. And one of the other things that I have enjoyed being a part of is on a trip with Hargraves out to the West Coast to a national convention. I came at him with the idea that we needed to implement an intern program at the school because they no longer had camp, and hosted a luncheon up at the Commerce Club in Atlanta, and had all of industry come in there and the major players in forestry in Georgia, and we made our pitch to them, and each and every one took at least one, some took 2 interns that first year.
That's wonderful.
I really can't speak as to whether it's still active. So far as I know it is. because things change. You didn't find out about it sometimes for a long time.
You mentioned the SAF. It's always been important to me. I know you've been important to it, the Okmulgee chapter, and the state. Any thoughts about the future of SAF? We're down to less than 13,000. It used to be 21 in the 80s. Now it's 13. Membership's going down. And my chapter has more people that just come for the meetings. They don't join up national.
Yeah. If you look at and read the Journal of Forestry, you will soon think that this is a Western journal, a Northeastern journal. The issues and the things that they constantly talk about basically are environmental issues out west.
Mm.
And they want to do. I think the fact that people see some of the things that the society is doing, like how much control they want over things, and in a meeting out in Mississippi, I was very vocal to the people from SAF about trying to start a certified forestry program. And they never have, and still don't understand my objection to it. I don't think that it can or should replace a state licensing group. The state licensing group has the authority to take your license away from you and by law prohibit you from practicing forestry when you are doing it below standards. If you in fact violate certified forestry program, then they take away your certification and you can keep right on practicing. So how would you say it? All certified forestry is a sort of ego type trip that you're taking. Excuse me a minute. Hello?
Hello? This is Dawn. I'm sorry, what did you say? I'm calling to speak to Johnny.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I should have taken it all through. The society's got some problems. I was a strong proponent years ago that southeastern section, Florida and Texas, and all of us, that we needed to form our own organization because the SAF didn't really represent us. And they are doing a little better job now, but not much.
Well, you had to go someplace, so we're just about ready to finish this up. If you want to sum up anything about the future, anything you want to pass on about what you think we should be doing as foresters, now is your time.
You know, the future is just as clouded to me as it is to everybody else. And we're going to go through probably 3 to 4 to 5 years of hard times, and it's not unusual. We're always going through hard times in forestry, and we're going to have to use all the resources we have to be able to find where we are and where we're going to fit into society. Long time ago, I did not approve of sticking your head in the sand, but I joined the Conservancy and all these things. I wanted to know what was going on with environmental issues. I feel like they're stronger today, that the environmental people, when they start telling the truth, that all of us can get on the same page and work for a common goal. But the environmental people, the world's worse about not telling what the truth truly is. This global warming thing, there's one set of facts going this way and one set of facts going this way, and where in the middle it comes together, Lord only knows. but we need to tell the truth about it.
I agree. Well, I see that you have a wise owl over there from the Georgia Forestry Association. That's a great honor to have. You're a Georgia Forester Hall of Fame. So Charlie Warner Jones, it's been my pleasure, Bill Consoletti as the Georgia historian, to record this for future posterity. I've had fun. Thank you.